Hi and welcome back. I hope you are all doing really well and ready to learn more. Before we go ahead, recall from the last video, we learned about all of these microorganisms and classified them into different groups, mostly based on the structure of their cell and the properties. These groups were bacteria, protozoans, algae and fungi. But at the end of the last video, we left with one interesting question. Well, I have heard about these things called viruses. Are those microorganisms? And how do they fit in this categorization? Well, that is the exact question that we are going to look at in this video. Now, when we look at viruses, actually there are few key differences compared to all other microorganisms. And that is why it is really hard to put viruses in any of the categories that we have seen so far. So let's look at the structure of a virus to understand why. So if you look at the virus here, it consists of a strand of DNA, or in some viruses it could be an RNA, which is covered by this outer layer for protection. Now, if we compare that with, let's say, a bacteria, viruses don't have a cell membrane or even these organelles which are key to perform various life operations like consuming nutrition and even reproduction. Without all of these organs, the virus actually is very much like a dust particle. Now, because viruses don't have any of these organs or cell membrane, they tend to be really small. In fact, they are up to 100 times smaller than the smallest bacteria. Okay, so going back to the question of classification of these viruses. If these viruses really behave like a particle of dust, now which we know is a non-living thing, can we then classify the viruses also as non-living? Well, that is where the ingenuity of viruses come into play. Now, unlike a dust particle, a virus particle actually has this strand of DNA or RNA inside of it. Now, when this virus actually enters another living cell, something very interesting happens. We already know that a living cell has a DNA and RNA of its own, which are actually instructing various organs in the cell to perform different operations. Now, when a virus actually enters a cell with its own DNA, what happens is that DNA then starts telling these organs to do random operations. On top of that, the virus actually uses the mechanism of the cell to replicate itself and grow. And in the process, it starts infecting all the other cells. Now, as more organs stop performing their functions, it actually manifests as different diseases. Like you must have seen a rash on your skin, or maybe find it hard to breathe when you have a cold. Right? That is because viruses have taken over some of the operations of those cells. So what are really viruses then? When they are out in the environment, they behave like a dust particle, but as soon as they enter a living cell, they get activated and start behaving like a living organisms. For this very reason, it's very hard to actually place viruses into any of the categories that we saw earlier. In fact, scientists consider viruses to be on the edge of living things. They are not really living, but they are not non-living either. Isn't that really interesting? Now, so far we have actually learned about different types of microorganisms, their structures, their behavior, and also about viruses. Now, it's time to start learning about their impact and how they affect us.